Now, Nelson Mandela's influence simply could not be contained within the walls of the prison in Robben Island, where he spent about 27 years of his life. While he kept his dream for a free country alive, he inspired his countrymen to do the same when he became president and inherited an economy which, quite frankly, was racked by economic sanctions and was extremely lopsided in favor of the white minority. With a look at what exactly the influence of Nelson Mandela was on South Africa and its economy, here's CCTV Sumitra Naidu.
I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February at about 3 p.m.
It was a proud moment for all South Africans when former President Nelson Mandela finally walked free at last, but Mandela had his work cut out for him. He needed to unite South Africans, but he also had to revive an ailing economy. South Africa was in a recession and on the verge of bankruptcy, largely as a result of international sanctions.
The economic isolation, the sanctions, the disinvestment campaign were beginning to bite. The whole range of strikes, mass action, also led to, the kind of unpredictability within the country. And around 1987, after the massive and unprecedented mine workers' strike organized by the National Union of Mine Workers, we saw massive retrenchments of tens of thousands of workers who were sent home.
And even though Mandela's release was welcomed by millions locally and internationally, many weren't convinced of the ANC's ability to ensure a peaceful and successful transition.
You didn't want to risk your brand because you had a branch or an outlet in South Africa.
But with the dawn of democracy came hope, and the sanctions were lifted. But there was still uncertainty in the investment community.
The uncertainty was because the ANC had always been an activist policy. They'd never really been in charge, and one had to measure what they were going to do. And there were a lot of issues that kept investors away. Uncertainty. Now that they were free, no one wanted to go into a country where there was a possibility of nationalization.
Mandela was president of the ANC and in 1994 became the president of South Africa. He focused his efforts into easing political and racial tensions and reassuring investors about the future of South Africa.
He immediately realized that the atmosphere and the environment had changed. So he then talked mixed economy. And that in itself, coming from him, even though ANC had moved to that space, was a huge endorsement and a confidence booster for those who wanted to return to South Africa for investments.
It was all about timing. The birth of a democratic South Africa coincided with many new developments in the global economy.
Remember in the 90s, what did we get? Internet, cell phones. As I said, the break of communism opening up new markets. So for global markets, for the global economy, it was a wonderful period in which to survive, in which to make money, because everything changed.
But not everybody believed that Nelson Mandela had the country's best interests at heart when he negotiated the terms of South Africa's democracy. Some still believe that Mandela sold out the majority of the people, more specifically the black population. Experts, however, say his role weighed heavily on reconciliation and the healing of the country.
That Mandela, I would liken him to a Moses in a biblical sense. Helped people to move out of bondage. But it was not his cohort and his leadership generation that was to take us to the promised land. It's those who took over from him. When Sunset Clause lapsed in 1999, that's when the issue of transformation ought to have kicked in radically, which seemingly had not taken place.
Even though Nelson Mandela didn't play a crucial role in uplifting the South African economy, analysts believe that his role to ensure peace and stability was imperative for future economic growth. Sumitra Naidu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
The Johannesburg Stock Exchange stopped trading for 5 minutes today in honor of the former South African president, Nelson Mandela. The JSE's officials said they were saddened by Mandela's passing, and all the posing of the JSE's markets really at 11 in the morning was a sign of deep respect for the global icon. The Banking Association of South Africa also did announce today that all their banks, from their head offices all the way to branches, will be closed on the day of Mandela's funeral. In its condolences, the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry described Mandela as an exceptional man whose presence will be sorely missed.
The fact that we can actually halt the center of the economy and actually take time to reflect on a single person's contribution to us as a country and to the world, really.
Let's examine Mandela's economic legacy in a little more detail. CCTV Sumitra Naidu is live in Johannesburg right now with the latest details on that. Sumitra, when Mandela came into power in 1994, the decade before that really was the worst for South Africa's economic performance since the Second World War. Give us a sense of what it was like back then. What challenges did he face?
Well, Rama, I think the most important challenge for Mandela was really to forge reconciliation, to bring this nation that was torn apart for decades by harsh laws and segregation, abuse and torture, to really mend the pain of the majority black population and the minority white population. Tensions were very high, and while there was some violence, many had feared that there was going to be a full-blown civil war in South Africa. So it was really about getting the black oppressed people to forgive and assure white people that they had nothing to fear, and that was a tough feat for Mandela. But yes, he took over the country at a time when international sanctions had really taken its toll on the South African economy, which is why the negotiations initially with Mandela by the apartheid government actually started. Nobody wanted to do business with South Africa until there was assurance that there would be a stable government and a stable economy. So Mandela's challenge here was to convince foreign investors that it was safe to do business in South Africa again.
Indeed, but the ANC prior really to 1994 had no experience at all in government, and fiscal discipline was absolutely necessary to getting South Africa's economy back on its feet. How did he overcome that challenge?
Well, this was seen as a really controversial move by Mandela during the negotiated settlement between the apartheid government and the ANC. So what they agreed on was the sunset clause. This effectively meant that apartheid-era civil servants would remain in their positions even after the ANC took office. The apartheid government insisted on this agreement. But many South Africans were very upset with this. But the move did help to ensure some stability during the transition. But then Mandela appointed Chris Liebenberg, and then that just lasted about 2 years, Chris Liebenberg as finance minister, and then Trevor Manuel was appointed as the first black finance minister of South Africa. Manuel had strong credentials. He held a position on the economic desk of the largest labor union in South Africa, COSATU. He was really the right guy to lead the economy back to a good health.
Indeed. Looking at the ANC's Freedom Charter written in the mid-50s, really, there was a very strong emphasis on ownership of assets going back to the people, a very strong emphasis on nationalization. How did Mandela avoid nationalizing companies, essentially? Because the ANC's charter essentially spoke about that in very fine detail.
Well, Rama, the platform on which the ANC government assumed office was on the Reconstruction and Development Program. It was a comprehensive program to address the apartheid legacy of inequality and deprivation through redistributing state resources. So this program was seen as a method to meet the massive needs of the country, and the question of nationalization was then deferred. However, the RDP was abandoned during Mandela's administration for various reasons, like the high cost of the program and also political pressure. So the question of nationalization remains a sticky point, and from time to time, it rears its ugly head again in South Africa.
Indeed. Finally, Sumitra, between persistent wage inequality and, of course, growing unemployment, how would we benchmark Mandela's heirs in the economic management, especially given the high standards that he set?
Well, not very well, and I don't think there's a fair comparison there, Rama, because the country's economic policy has continually changed since Mandela's administration. So we first had the RDP, and then we had GEAR, which was a growth and economic development and redistribution program. And then we had, during Thabo Mbeki's time, the Accelerated and Shared Growth Initiative of South Africa. And now, of course, under President Jacob Zuma, we have the National Development Plan. So there's been so many policies and no real implementation over the years, which is why we are actually sitting with this high unemployment and weak growth. So there's lots of work to be done here. And analysts seem to think that there's an oversupply of policy in South Africa and very little action. We really need implementation to actually turn this economy around right now.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for that. CCTV Sumit and I do live in Johannesburg, examining Nelson Mandela's economic legacy. Now, quick run through some news about central bankers. Let's start in Nigeria. The central bank governor over there, Lamido Sanusi, is preparing to leave that position in June 2014. The 52-year-old told a bankers' dinner in Nigeria that he had succeeded in doing what he set out to do when he took charge 4 years ago, and he would not be looking for an extension of his contract. His announcement, however, has raised quite a bit of concern among investors that his success in curbing inflation and stabilizing the naira may be undone ahead of elections next year. Now, of key concern is exchange rate stability and the possible devaluation of the Nigerian naira, which the central bank has kept within a plus or minus 3% range at around 155 naira to the American dollar. President Goodluck Jonathan has not given any indications of who Lamido Sanusi's replacement may be. Now, over 120 Chinese firms are attending an ongoing technology and services expo in Ethiopia's capital. The event is sponsored by China's Commerce Ministry, and it aims to boost trade and investment volumes between China and Ethiopia, as well as other African nations as well. The expo has provided a forum for exhibitors and buyers to exchange ideas on information technology, cut deals, and get acquainted with the latest trends. Chinese exhibitors have been facilitated to get a feel of the Ethiopian market, while Ethiopian customers get to interact with Chinese-made goods and technology.
They produce different types of products that cater for different levels of society. Basically, it is time now for China to come to Africa, not Africa to go to China. Africa is now rising, and then to tap this resource, the African resource, China has to come to Africa.
This exhibition will, I hope, help our visitors to have a better understanding of the Chinese products and technologies, and let them reflect on the business opportunities of not only trading goods, but also attracting potential Chinese investors with Chinese technology.
And at just about a quarter to the top of the hour, it's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be talking about making amends when we come back. The French mining company Arriva is treating miners who fell sick during their years working for one of its subsidiaries.
BizAsia. Asia means business.
Welcome back. Thousands of mine workers in Gabon are receiving treatment for illnesses they say they developed during their time working in a mine subsidiary of the French mining giant Areva. The mine in question produced over 26,000 tons of uranium over 38 years, and it was controlled by Areva from 1986 until it closed down in 1999, at the time primarily due to falling uranium prices. CCTV's Jitu Abraham takes up the story.
Gasping for air, former mine worker Gaston Ipuli says he's had trouble breathing for years. But this is the first time he's seeking medical advice. He's being examined by a doctor in a clinic in Gabon's capital of Libreville. Ipuli is among thousands of miners working in the mineral-rich southeast that say the uranium and magnesium mines in their region are causing health problems for the people. Environmental activists and residents in the area accuse French mining company Areva and its local Gabonese subsidiary, Comuf, of knowingly exposing its employees and people living near its mining zones to harmful materials. After years of pressure from local NGOs who threatened to boycott Areva's, the mining company launched an initiative to treat thousands of former miners who worked for the company.
The doctor examined me this morning and gave me my test results, x-rays, blood tests and so on. The doctor said that I was fine, but that I needed to come back in 2 years and get tested again.
I always tell them that one can have diabetes or HIV/AIDS, and it's not because one works in the mines that one will either be HIV positive or have diabetes. So we need to identify what the patient is suffering from and find out if it is linked to exposure while working in the mines.
According to environmental activists, mining activity in the region has led to pollution of rivers and soil and the disappearance of fish. For half a century, some of the world's biggest uranium mines worked in this region, making Muanda a flourishing industrial town. Eli Nabori, former mine worker, says he experienced health problems after working in the mine and feels abandoned by Gabon's government and Areva.
We were not aware that there was radioactivity. We were only told later when they started examining us. But 2 years later, they are still not telling us what we suffer from. Our medical results have never been released and no medication was prescribed. No one was compensated.
Residents say even houses in Muanda are contaminated by radioactive waste because they were constructed from mud from the area. The houses have now been marked to be destroyed by the International Atomic Energy Agency. The technical director at Comuf says safety measures were in place, but many workers did not understand the dangers of working in the mines. Jitu Abraham, CCTV.
Let's get back to South Africa now. Broad-based black economic empowerment does remain a key challenge for President Jacob Zuma's government, and it's often tried to meet its empowerment objectives by directing more state spending towards black-owned enterprises. Transnet has now announced that the companies that will supply fuel to the state-owned entity for the next 5 years. CCTV's Angela Coppola has the details.
The $1.2 billion fuel supply contract will be handled by 9 black and women-owned businesses. Importantly for Transnet, 8 of them are 100% black-owned, while 3 new entrants have been introduced into the sector.
State-owned companies are actually hitting the message that we must bring particularly black people and women-owned companies right into the center of economic transformation, so that instead of continuing to play a peripheral role, they now partake of very serious industrial activities which can ensure that we achieve our goal of broadening the economy.
The new suppliers were shortlisted after an 18-month tender process. This saw Transnet evaluate companies on price, supplier development, BBEE, technical ability and national and regional footprint. The state-owned entity was quick to squash any thought that it had paid a premium to meet its socio-economic development goals.
We are not of the opinion that we paid a premium on this deal. If you take the societal benefits, bringing black women into the mainstream of the economy, into a protected industry, no, we do not think that we paid a premium.
The new suppliers will provide fuel to Transnet depots for road vehicles diesel fuel for locomotives, and marine diesel for dredges and tugs in their 6 harbours.
We're more than excited because we've been facing lots of barriers to entry, and it's defining. I mean, it's literally a David versus Goliath, where with the bigger SOEs has been so brave and taking on capable hands like ourselves.
It's the first time that I see so many women participating in the energy sector, predominantly for a contract that is for a state-owned company. So it is absolutely exciting for us.
It's actually a very defining moment for South African business and particularly for South African businesswomen, because it's almost 80% of the suppliers for this particular contract are women. And we find that women contribute directly and give back to society and the development of other women.
It's a big deal for an organization like ours, but I think it's also a big deal for Transnet in that it represents a genuine empowerment opportunity.
This award is seen as a giant step in the government's drive to level the economic playing fields. Importantly, there is a mentoring aspect to the deal, which should see the suppliers building their own intellectual property. Until the tender award, Transnet sourced its own fuels from those 6 majors that are operating in South Africa. What remains to be seen is where the new suppliers are going to source their fuel from, in what is traditionally a very tight margin business. I'm Angelo Coppola for CCTV in Johannesburg.
Right then, quick run through the markets now for you. Today being a Friday, of course, the Egyptian market was relatively closed. Lots of red numbers here for you today. Let's start in Nigeria, however. Down by about a third on the closing numbers for the all-share index, 38,738.15, the relevant number there. Despite the 5-minute halt in trading and the JAC, it ended the day higher by a full percent. And the 20-share index in Nairobi still firmly in correction mode. A bit of profit taking happening there, down by half a percentage point. The Egyptian markets closed